The shadow behind the smile. There are men and women who walk among us who seem to sparkle in the public eye. They are charming, confident, even magnetic, masters of their craft, skilled at conversation, polished in appearance, and seemingly impenetrable in their strength. They look like leaders. They sound like sages. But beneath that polished exterior lies a hollow frame of borrowed light. C.S. Lewis once warned that the greatest evil is not now done in those sordid dens of crime that Dickens loved to paint, but it is conceived and ordered in clean, carpeted offices by quiet men with white collars. The evil he alluded to is subtle, camouflaged, and often seductive, not thunderous and obvious, but smiling and persuasive. That same principle holds true for the spirit of narcissism. You see, narcissism is not always loud, it is not always theatrical. Often it hides behind good deeds and selective empathy, but its fuel, its engine is always the same: control. Not over systems or over environments, but over people, over you. It demands to be needed, adored, centered, and when you begin to step away, when you see through the facade, a shift occurs. The narcissist begins to crumble, not outwardly at first, but inwardly, deeply, and irrevocably. This message is not simply about human psychology. It is a spiritual battle, a war in the unseen. And like all spiritual battles, victory does not come through violence, but through vision, through clarity, through choosing what is holy over what is seductive, through walking away not in anger, but in truth. And in that act, you strike the deepest blow possible to the heart of narcissism. Now, let us uncover the 5 moves that, when led by truth and sustained by discipline, strike not with vengeance, but with divine precision. These are not tactics of revenge, but reflections of righteousness. Each one is a sword in the hands of the awakened, and they all point toward liberation. 1. The power of silence, when stillness becomes your sword. There is a kind of silence that terrifies the narcissist. Not the silence of retreat, not the silence of passive tolerance, but the silence that emerges from a soul that has awakened to the truth. A silence that no longer exists to keep the peace, but to protect the sacred. A silence that signals not submission, but sovereignty. The narcissist lives on reaction. Your words, your tears, your fury. They feed the illusion that they still have power over you. Every emotional response becomes a thread they weave into their script. They are not satisfied by harmony. They are not interested in genuine connection. They seek only to dominate the atmosphere of your mind and soul, and they do so by demanding attention. Your outrage is their applause. Your confusion is their control. Your attempts to explain, defend, or reason with them are proof that they are still the center of your world. But silence is different. Silence does not argue. Silence does not defend. Silence does not perform. Silence withdraws the oxygen from the fire. Silence is the moment the curtain falls and the audience leaves. It is not a scream, not a sermon, not even a goodbye. It is the invisible gesture that says, "I see through you, and I owe you nothing." To the narcissist, this is the most threatening act of all. You see, they are not terrified by confrontation. They can twist confrontation into justification. They are not wounded by shouting matches. They frame your fury as evidence of your instability. But silence holds a mirror, and in that mirror they see what they cannot unsee: their irrelevance. In the world of the narcissist, relevance is everything. They need to be needed. They must be central. And the silence of the one they once controlled confronts them with their greatest fear. Not that you are angry, but that you are indifferent. And yet we must understand this silence is not the silence of resentment. It is not a manipulative silence, nor a vengeful one. It is the silence that rises from healing, a silence that says, "I will no longer explain my worth. I will no longer respond to distortion. I will no longer fight for space in a delusion I did not create. This silence is holy. It is the kind of silence Christ held before Pilate, the kind of silence that caused his accusers to tremble, not because they had won, but because, in his stillness, he revealed something greater than defense. He revealed truth, and truth, when revealed, does not need to shout. It is written in Proverbs 17:27-28. The one who has knowledge uses words with restraint, and whoever has understanding is even-tempered. Even fools are thought wise if they keep silent, and discerning if they hold their tongues. You see, restraint is not cowardice. Restraint is strength. It is power under control. When you choose silence in the presence of a narcissist, you are not abandoning the truth, you are withholding access. You are saying, you will no longer drink from the well of my emotions. I no longer dance to the rhythm of your chaos. I am still. I am steady. And I am no longer yours to shake. And this devastates them. Because to a narcissist, stillness equals exposure. Your silence says, I've seen behind the mask. And once that mask has been seen, it cannot be unseen. Once you know the game, you cannot unknow it. The illusion is shattered. And without the illusion, the narcissist is just a person, flawed, fragile, and frightened. But it is not just about what this silence does to them, it is about what it does for you. Silence is not just a wall, it is a sanctuary. It is the sacred space where you begin to hear your own voice again, no longer drowned out by their narrative. It is the fertile ground where your clarity, your discernment, and your spiritual strength are reborn. And in that stillness, you begin to remember who you are. Not the person they tried to control, but the person God created in strength, in truth, and in His image. It is in this silence that your nervous system begins to reset. It is in this silence that your prayers become clearer, that the fog begins to lift, and that peace, real peace, not the performance of peace. Yes, the narcissist will rage against your silence. They will accuse you of cruelty. They will attempt to bait you, provoke you, guilt you into speaking again. But do not be deceived. Their panic is not proof that your silence is wrong. It is proof that your silence is working. Because they can only control what they can engage. And when you no longer engage, when your soul no longer trembles at their presence, they lose access to the emotional throne they once sat upon. You no longer orbit around their gravity, and without your orbit, their world begins to unravel. But here is the key: silence must be fortified. Silence without a boundary is a pause. Silence with a boundary is a turning point. Because once you have chosen silence, the next step is to guard that silence, to define what enters and what does not, to decide who has access and who does not. And that brings us to the second move, perhaps the most radical of all in the eyes of the narcissist, the drawing of the boundary. But make no mistake, your silence was the beginning. It was the opening gate. It was the first sacred move that broke their illusion and recentered your soul on truth. It was not empty. It was full of fire. And now that the fire is lit, we must build the wall that protects it. But silence, as powerful as it is, cannot stand alone. It is the beginning of your withdrawal from darkness, but it is not yet your defense against its return. For what good is a soul that is still if the gates to that soul are left wide open? What use is clarity if the doors to your peace remain unguarded? You see, silence may strip the narcissist of their illusion, but only boundaries can keep them from slipping back in. And so the next step is not merely absence, but architecture. You must now build the perimeter of your restoration. You must draw the sacred line. 2. The strength of boundaries when love learns to say no. If silence is the stillness of your soul returning to itself, then boundaries are the walls that guard it. They are not acts of aggression, but acts of alignment. They are the expression of your rebirth. They say to the world and to yourself, "This is who I am. This is what I will no longer carry. This is the threshold of my peace, and you shall not cross it without reverence." The narcissist does not fear anger. They do not fear confrontation. In fact, they often welcome it. Chaos is their language. But what they cannot survive is the quiet, clear, immovable strength of a boundary, a line drawn without apology, a standard enforced without explanation, because boundaries reveal the truth they have long tried to hide, not only from you but from themselves. That their control over you was never real. It was borrowed, fragile, dependent. You see, the narcissist survives in spaces where lines are blurred. They thrive in ambiguity. They exploit the gray areas of empathy, of guilt, of compassion. They test your limits not to understand you, but to erase them, to see how much of yourself you are willing to give up in order to maintain the illusion of peace. But a boundary ends the ambiguity. A boundary is not a demand, it is a declaration. It does not shout, "Obey me," but rather whispers, "You may no longer reach me." C.S. Lewis once observed, "Love is not affectionate feeling, but a steady wish for the loved person's ultimate good, as far as it can be obtained." And sometimes, beloved, the ultimate good is no longer being accessible to the person who refuses to change. Not because you hate them, but because you finally recognize the cost of staying close. And when love matures, truly matures, it learns to say no. Boundaries are not merely psychological strategies. They are sacred structures. They are evidence that you have remembered what it means to be holy, set apart, not owned by another's need, not enslaved by another's drama. When you draw a boundary, you say, "I am no longer participating in the narrative of your dysfunction. I am no longer the echo chamber for your denial." But do not be surprised when your boundary is tested. The narcissist will not respect it. They will reinterpret it as cruelty. They will call it selfishness, abandonment, betrayal. But remember, their resistance is not a sign that you've done something wrong. It is confirmation that you've finally done something right. They will rage because you've broken their rhythm. They will sulk because you've closed the door. But that is not your burden to bear. The truth is, the narcissist has trained you to over-explain, to overextend, to justify your pain in ways that excuse theirs. They have conditioned you to think that saying no is an act of war. But it is not. It is the beginning of peace, and peace in its truest form will always provoke those who profit from your exhaustion. A true boundary is not built with bricks of bitterness, but with beams of clarity. It says, "I wish you well, but I will not be your well." It says, "I forgive you, but I will not forget myself in the process." And here is where the boundary becomes holy, when you stop explaining it, when you stop seeking understanding from the very person who misused your understanding to begin with. A boundary that must be explained to be respected was never going to be respected at all. There is power in simply stating no more and allowing that statement to stand like a gate unshaken by the storm. And when you do, when you draw that line, not in anger, but in truth, you will feel something extraordinary return to you. Your dignity. But dignity once reclaimed must also be defended, not through fight, but through detachment. And this is where the next transformation unfolds. Because boundaries do not merely expose the narcissist's limits, they expose their desperation. And when they see you will not step back into the old script, they begin to panic. But there comes a moment, after the boundary has been drawn, after your soul has taken its rightful place behind that sacred line, when the narcissist realizes that the old story can no longer be told. They sense it in your silence, in your steadiness, in your refusal to explain what needs no justification. And in that moment they do what all illusionists do when the audience sees the trick. They scramble. They reach for the old script, hoping you will return to your role, but you don't, because something in you has changed, and it is in that holy refusal to perform that the illusion begins to die. 3. Rejecting the narcissist script. When you stop playing the role they wrote for you. The narcissist does not live in truth. They live in theater. They write a script not with ink but with insinuation, not with paper but with pressure, and you, often unknowingly, become an actor in their performance. They cast you as the peacekeeper, the forgiver, the fixer, the fool, not because that is who you are, but because that is what their illusion requires you to be. But something happened when you grew silent, when you built your boundary, when you stopped feeding the script lines. The play paused, the spotlight dimmed, and for the first time, the narcissist felt it, not your absence, but your awakening. You see, the narcissist doesn't fear confrontation. What they fear is your clarity. You walk off the stage. And that, beloved, is not rebellion. That is resurrection. C.S. Lewis once wrote, "You can't go back and change the beginning, but you can start where you are and change the ending." That's exactly what you're doing. You are refusing to live inside their story any longer. You are no longer the character they control. You are becoming the author of your own life again. Not to hurt them, but to finally heal you. And this is when the panic begins. Because the narcissist never loved you. They loved the version of you who kept the story going. The version who excused the lies, smoothed over the chaos, played the dependable role even when exhausted. But now that version is gone. And what remains is someone who has stopped auditioning for acceptance. Someone who no longer finds worth in applause from the wrong crowd. Someone who has found truth. And truth, when fully embraced, makes performance impossible. You no longer raise your voice to prove a point. You no longer explain your value in the face of insult. You no longer plead to be seen. You simply see yourself, and that vision is enough. You become, in their world, a silent protest, a monument to the truth they tried to bury. And nothing unsettles the narcissist more than a person who no longer reacts. Because the script only works if the actor obeys their cues. And so they escalate. They will reach into their arsenal of manipulation. Guilt, shame, nostalgia, provocation. They may remind you of your past mistakes, exaggerate your flaws, or accuse you of abandoning them. But what they are really saying is this: please come back to the play. I need your lines to make my role believable again. But you do not return, because you now understand something they never could, that being cast in someone else's fantasy is not love. It is bondage. And God did not design you for bondage. He designed you for truth. And truth has no need for theater. Now, instead of bending yourself to fit their narrative, you are stretching toward the life God actually wrote for you. A life where dignity is not earned by compliance, but given by creation. A life where you do not exist as someone's mirror, but as God's image bearer. A life where the only script you follow is the one written in grace and guided by discernment. And here lies the final death of their control. You no longer need them to validate your story. You've learned to walk without the spotlight. You've learned to breathe without the applause. You've learned to stand without being propped up by performance. But as you step away from the stage, something happens. Not just in them, but in the world they constructed, that world begins to crack, because once you stop playing your part, the entire illusion becomes unsustainable. And this brings us to the fourth revelation, not about you, but about them. For when the script fails and the actor walks away, the playwright is left staring at an empty stage, and in that vacancy, the mask begins to slip, and what lies behind it is far more fragile than they ever wanted you to see. 4. The collapse behind the mask, when the illusion begins to rot from within. A mask can fool a room, a mask can fool a church, a mask can even fool a spouse for years, but a mask cannot fool eternity. And when the mask no longer serves its purpose, when you, the one it was tailored to manipulate, walk away, it begins to decay. Not with a dramatic crash, but with a silent unraveling. The narcissist does not collapse in public. No, their disintegration is too fragile for that. It happens in the unseen places, in the silence of the night, in the quiet moments when no one is there to mirror back their illusion. It begins when your absence confronts them with a reality they cannot reshape, that the story they built was never real. You see, narcissists are not sustained by love. They are sustained by performance. They do not build intimacy, they build image. And without you reacting, responding, defending, apologizing, they lose their stage. They lose the audience. And without an audience, the mask becomes unbearable. The play ends. The applause dies. And what remains is a kind of emptiness they cannot survive. This is not mere loneliness. It is irrelevance. And for the narcissist, irrelevance is worse than death. And so, in the wake of your silence, they scramble. They may jump into a new relationship within days, not out of love, but out of panic. They may flaunt success, post inspirational quotes, declare a new beginning, but none of it is real. It is camouflage. It is an anxious flailing meant to say, I'm still someone, I still matter, look at me, please, someone look at me. But the eyes that once affirmed them, yours, are no longer there. C.S. Lewis once wrote, the terrible thing, the almost impossible thing, is to hand over your whole self to Christ. But it is far easier than what we are all trying to do instead, to remain what we call ourselves, to keep personal happiness as our great aim in life, and yet at the same time be good. The narcissist does exactly that. They want the benefits of goodness, the image of kindness, the applause of generosity, without ever relinquishing the self, without dying to ego, without kneeling before truth. And so they build a kingdom of mirrors, each one reflecting a false light. But the moment you remove your mirror, a crack appears. And the cracks never stay small. At first they will deny it. They will rage, project, accuse. They will tell others that you were unstable, disloyal, too sensitive, too dramatic. But behind the scenes they are unraveling, because the control they once held was never over reality, it was over your perception. And now that you see clearly, they no longer know how to exist. This collapse does not lead to transformation, not yet, because transformation requires repentance, and repentance requires humility. And humility is the one posture the narcissist's soul has never been trained to adopt. So instead, they cycle, rage to silence, silence to seduction, seduction to despair. But the loop is broken because you are no longer in it. And here is the most heartbreaking part. They know it. They may never say it, they may never admit it, but they feel it. Not like a fire, but like a void. A coldness they cannot explain, a silence they cannot fill. And so they return to old tactics. They reach for familiar games, they test the waters. But none of it works, because you have changed. Your stillness is no longer a pause between cycles. It is a declaration. The performance is over. And now for the first time they are alone, truly alone, not because you left, but because they refuse to follow you into truth. And this, beloved, is where their soul trembles, because in the absence of control, they are left to face the very thing they've spent their entire life avoiding, themselves. But this reckoning is not visible. They may appear composed, they may even seem triumphant, but that is the genius of the mask. It hides the collapse even from its wearer. What you will begin to see are symptoms, erratic choices, shallow replacements, impulsive behaviors, meaningless noise, and none of it is healing. All of it is running. Running from stillness, running from memory, running from exposure. But no matter how far they run, they cannot outrun the echo of your absence. Because your absence is not just distance, it is indictment. It is proof that they were seen, and that seeing them did not bind you, it freed you. And that truth, the one they tried so hard to conceal, has now been made visible. The collapse has begun, quietly, invisibly, but irreversibly. And now we arrive at the final confrontation, not between you and them, but between them and truth. Because once the mirror is shattered and the stage is empty, there remains one final blow to the illusion, the realization that you will not return. And that, more than your silence, more than your boundary, more than your refusal to perform, is the move that breaks them completely. 5. The final reckoning when the mirror shatters completely. There comes a moment in every story of deliverance when the chains do not merely loosen, they disintegrate. The spell breaks, the illusion dies, and the one who once stood in control is left staring into the wreckage of their own reflection. That moment for the narcissist is not always visible, but it is final. It is the reckoning. You see, what they needed most was never your affection, it was never your loyalty, it was never even your presence, it was your reflection, the way you saw them, the way you centered them, the way you adjusted your truth to fit their narrative. In the narcissist world, identity is not discovered, it is extracted. They do not build selfhood from within, they scavenge it from others, and you unknowingly had become their mirror. But when that mirror is taken away, not shattered in fury, but gently turned, a strange silence fills the room they once ruled. It is not the silence of peace, it is the silence of exposure, the silence of a soul no longer shielded by illusion. And in that silence, they face what they cannot bear, the weight of their own irrelevance. To the narcissist, your absence is not just inconvenient, it is unthinkable. It is an affront to the mythology they created in which you were the dependent, the broken, the one who could never leave. But you did leave. Not with revenge, not with hatred, but with revelation. You stepped out of their orbit. You ceased to feed their fantasy, and in doing so, you sentenced the illusion to death. C.S. Lewis once said, "A man who has been in error must not be merely freed from error, but taught to recognize it." But narcissists are never taught by direct confrontation. They are taught by the absence of the lie they once lived in. And your absence, steady, silent, unshakable, is now their only teacher. But do not mistake this for transformation. Most narcissists do not grow from loss, because growth requires humility, and humility is formed in surrender. Yet the narcissist has spent their life avoiding surrender at all costs. They have built temples to the self, they have worshipped at the altar of control, and when that control crumbles, they do not confess. They compensate. This is where the reckoning becomes tragic. They rush to replace you, not with a person, but with a supply, another mirror, another soul to reflect what they no longer see in themselves. But each replacement works less than the one before, because the mask no longer fits as tightly, the script no longer flows as convincingly. The energy required to uphold the illusion becomes exhausting, and beneath the surface of all their display, the selfies, the sudden romance, the performative healing, something darker takes root. The creeping dread that this collapse might not be temporary, that they may not come back from this one. Because this time, the person they once controlled did not rage, did not beg, did not scream. This time, you simply walked away and never looked back. And in doing so, you revealed a truth so devastating they may never speak it aloud. You saw them and left anyway. That is what breaks them. Not that you stopped loving them, but that you stopped needing them. That your voice no longer trembled. That your peace no longer included them. And that the world, despite their warnings, did not end without them. And now, in the quiet corners of their mind, they replay it. Not the fights, not the drama, but the ending. The moment the mirror turned. The moment the door closed, not in fury, but in finality. And in that finality, their identity begins to dissolve. They may still posture, still perform, but deep within, they know they will still live. They will still live. They will still live. They still have heart. Because something has shifted that cannot be undone. Not by apology, not by rage, not by seduction. Because you've changed, not just how you see them, but how you see yourself. You no longer exist to affirm a lie. You now live aligned with truth. And truth, once embraced, is the one thing the narcissist can never re-enter, because it exposes them. Not by assault, but by absence. You have become, to them, the ultimate mirror. A mirror they can no longer look into, because it no longer flatters. It no longer bends. It simply reflects. And what it reflects now is something they've spent their entire life avoiding, the reality of who they are, without control, without performance, without you. And this is where the reckoning becomes complete, not in drama, but in distance, not in noise, but in knowing. And you are free, not because they changed, but because you did. Because you stopped pleading and started praying. You stopped explaining and started discerning. You stopped chasing the illusion of reconciliation and chose instead the path of restoration. Your mirror is no longer theirs to use. Your soul is no longer theirs to shape. And your peace, hard-won and heaven-sent, is no longer negotiable. You have left the performance. And the stage will never feel the same without you. Let it be so.